The wind off the Nebraska flats had a mean edge that April evening, the kind of wind that got up under a coat and hunted for warmth like something alive. Josiah Merrick was closing the corral gate on the last of the yearlings when he saw her at the far end of his lane, a girl no taller than a fence post, dragging a boy on each hand and a third strapped to her back with what looked like a length of curtain sash. She stopped at his gate and did not knock, did not call out. She just stood there, and when he walked down the packed dirt of the drive to meet her, she lifted her chin the way a soldier lifts a chin before a firing squad, and she said the thing she had come to say before he could ask. "Mister, could my orphan brothers just eat tonight? I'm not asking for me. I can go without. It's them." He was 52 years old and had buried a wife and a son inside the same 12 months 7 winters back, and he had not, in all the days since, been asked a question that landed in him quite the way that one did. He looked at her, brown hair the color of tilled sod, eyes that had done more grieving than eating, and he looked at the 3 small faces hitched to her, and he did the arithmetic without meaning to. 4. There were 4 of them. He had cooked for one man for 7 years. "Come on up to the house," Josiah said, and he did not say it kindly, because kindness would have broken her right there on his gate, and he could see that plain. He said it flat, the way a foreman gives an order, and she took it the same way, as instruction, and she walked past him up the drive with her chin still lifted and the smallest boy asleep against her shoulder, and no thanks yet spoken, because thanks was a currency she did not have to spare. His kitchen was a plain square room with a black iron stove and a table long enough for 8, but set most nights for 1. He had a pot of beans that had been simmering since noon with a hock of salt pork, and a half loaf of bread his hired girl from town had baked Monday, and a crock of butter and a jar of last year's peach preserves he kept meaning to open and never did. He opened it now. He set out 4 plates. He did the 4th deliberately, letting her see him do it, letting her hear the tin ring on the wood, because he understood without being told that this girl had been turned from doorways all the way down the county line, and that a 4th plate was the whole answer to whatever question her small brothers had been carrying in their bellies for what he was guessing was a good long while. The oldest boy was maybe 9, the middle one 6. The one on her back had the round-cheeked, milk-sweet look of a child not yet 3, and he did not stir even when she unstrapped the curtain sash and eased him down onto the bench. She sat between them like a hen with chicks, and she watched Josiah spoon beans onto their plates before she would take any for her own, and when he pushed a plate across to her too, she looked at it a long moment before she picked up the spoon. "My name is Prudence Halloran," she said. "These are Micah, Ansel, and the little one is Wyatt. Our folks are gone since February. We've been walking since the thaw." Josiah nodded and cut bread. He did not ask from where. He did not ask about the folks. He had learned in the 7 years of his own grief that the worst thing a stranger could do was reach a hand into a fresh wound and rummage. "Now, I want you to picture this for a moment before we go on. The yellow lamp on that kitchen table, the wind still working at the shutters, and 4 people eating in a room that has been quiet for a very long time. Wherever you are tonight, whatever kitchen or room you're sitting in, hold on to that picture. Because what happened over the next 6 weeks on Josiah Merrick's place was not the kind of thing that gets written into history books, but it was the kind of thing that the people who lived it never once forgot. He put them in the front room that first night. He hauled down 2 straw ticks from the loft and laid them by the stove, and he gave Prudence his own quilt off his own bed, the one his wife Ellen had pieced the year they were married. She tried to refuse it. He set it down on the tick and walked out of the room without argument. And by the time he came back with an extra tin of water and a rag for the little one's dirty face, she had spread it over her brothers and was sitting on the floor beside them with her back against the wall and her eyes already closing against her will. He slept poorly. He had not slept with the sound of children in his house since the winter Ellen and the boy had gone, and the small breathing from the front room worked at him in a way he had not braced for. Around 3 in the morning he got up and stood in the doorway and watched them a while. The tangle of arms and legs, the girl's brown head bent protectively over the littlest one's, and he understood something then, quiet as the striking of a clock. He was going to have to make a decision before sunup, and the decision was not whether to feed them again in the morning. The decision was what a man does when the good Lord walks 4 children up his lane in the dying light of a Tuesday and hands him the reins. By breakfast he had made it. He fried eggs. He fried them 6 at a time, which was a thing he had not done since Ellen. He put 4 plates on the table and one for himself, and left one place empty out of a habit he did not yet realize he had. Prudence saw the empty plate. She did not ask. That was the thing about her he was already coming to respect. The girl did not spend words she did not have. "You'll stay through planting," he said, over coffee, not looking at her. "I've got a bunkhouse hasn't been used in 3 years. I'll clean it out today. The boys'll work what they can work. You'll cook and mend if you're able. I'll pay you the same I'd pay a hired girl, which is to say not much, but you'll eat 3 squares and sleep dry, and come fall we'll talk about what next." Prudence set her cup down very carefully. She looked at him a long moment, and the pride in her fought the exhaustion in her, and the exhaustion won, but only just. "I can cook," she said. "I can mend. I can shoot if I have to. I don't take charity, Mr. Merrick. I'll earn every plate." "I never offered you charity," Josiah said. "I offered you a job. There's a difference. Don't confuse them again." She held his gaze, and something in her went still, and she nodded once, slow, and he saw the girl accept the terms the way a soldier accepts a treaty, with dignity and no illusions. Word got around, of course. It always did. The Merrick place sat 6 miles out from the town of Adderley, which was one general store, one Methodist church, one saloon that pretended to be a hotel, and about 94 people who had nothing to do all winter but keep an accounting of one another's business. By the second Sunday, a wagon rolled up his drive containing the widow Ashcroft and her sister-in-law Hetty Barnes, both of them carrying baskets and both of them wearing the particular expression of women who had come to inspect a situation. Josiah met them on the porch. He did not invite them inside. "Josiah," said the widow Ashcroft, "we heard tell you'd taken in some children." "I hired a housekeeper," Josiah said. "She's got her brothers with her. I set them to work." "A young woman," said Hetty Barnes. 19 years old and the sole guardian of 3 orphaned boys, Josiah said. "You want to come inside and meet her, you're welcome. You want to stand on my porch and count the ways it looks, you can do that from the road." The widow Ashcroft's mouth folded up like a purse. Hetty Barnes made a small sound. They left their baskets on the porch step, cornbread, a jar of pickled beets, a length of blue calico, and they climbed back into their wagon without another word. And by Wednesday the story in Adderley was that Josiah Merrick had brought a girl and 3 children out to his place and would not let respectable women in the door. He did not care what they said. He had cared, once, what a town said about a man. He had buried the person who taught him to care, along with the boy she had died bringing into the world, and after that the opinions of Hetty Barnes had lost a good deal of their weight. Prudence heard the wagon leave. She was in the kitchen, and she did not turn from the sink, but she said, quiet, "I don't want to make trouble for you, Mr. Merrick." "You're not the one making it," he said. And that was all. The boys took to the place the way small animals take to a warm barn. Micah, the oldest, was serious and quick, and by the second week he could saddle a horse without help and had begun following Josiah at a respectful distance whenever there was work to be done outside. Ansel, the middle boy, was softer, dreamier, prone to sitting on the fence with a stalk of grass in his teeth watching the sky. And Josiah did not correct this, because Josiah remembered being 6 years old and having no one who let him watch the sky. The little one, Wyatt, followed Prudence like a shadow with legs, and by the 3rd week he had begun calling Josiah Mr. Joe, which he seemed to have invented on his own, and which Josiah did not correct either. It was in the 4th week that the letter came. It came by way of the mail rider, a boy of about 14 named Elmer who rode a mule and made the loop from the county seat once a fortnight. He handed the letter to Josiah at the gate, and Josiah looked at the return address, a lawyer's office in Lincoln, and he felt the muscles in his back go tight in a way he had not felt them go tight in a long time. He did not open it in front of Prudence. He walked out past the corral and down to the creek where the willows were coming into leaf, and he sat on a stump and slit the envelope with his pocket knife, and he read the letter twice, and then he read it a 3rd time to be sure. It was, in the flat, unadorned language of the law, a notice from a man named Corbin Halloran of Lincoln, who claimed to be the paternal uncle of one Prudence Halloran, aged 19, and the legal next of kin to 3 minor children named in the letter. Mr. Halloran, the lawyer wrote, had been apprised through a source in Adderley of his niece and nephew's current residence, and was formally requesting that they be delivered into his guardianship no later than the 1st of June, at which point he would arrive to collect them personally. Failure to comply, The lawyer, noted with careful neutrality, would result in a filing with the county court. Josiah sat on that stump for a long time. The creek ran, and the willows moved, and a red-winged blackbird complained from the reeds. And he thought about a great many things. About Ellen, about the boy he had lost, about the shape of his own life these last 7 years, and about the girl in his kitchen who had walked up his lane with her chin lifted like a soldier at a firing squad. He thought about what a man does when a piece of paper arrives from a city he has never seen and tries to take from him something he was not supposed to have wanted in the first place. By the time he walked back up to the house, the sun was low, and Prudence was on the porch snapping beans into a bowl, and she looked at his face and stopped, her hands still in the bowl, and she said, "What?" He gave her the letter. He did not sit. He watched her read it, and he watched her go pale, and he watched her go still in the particular way she had of going still when she was making a decision she was not going to let anyone talk her out of. "He beat my father," Prudence said. "That's why my father left Nebraska. That's why we were in Kansas, why we came back walking, why nobody knew where we'd gone. Corbin Halloran is not taking my brothers." "All right," Josiah said. "You don't understand. He'll come with the sheriff. He'll have papers." "I understand fine," Josiah said. "You mind if I sit down?" She stared at him. Her hands were trembling in the bowl of beans. She had not once, in 6 weeks, allowed her hands to tremble where he could see them. He sat, and he took the bowl gently out of her lap, and he set it on the porch boards, and he said, "Tell me about him. Every last thing you know. Then we'll figure the rest." She told him. She told him about her father's crooked left arm that had never healed straight from a beating when he was 12. She told him about the farm outside Lincoln that her father had walked away from with nothing but a change of clothes and her mother's hand. She told him about a letter her father had written and never sent, that she had found among his things after the fever took him and her mother inside the same February week. A letter that named Corbin Halloran as the reason a family of 5 had lived on the run for 11 years. She had carried that letter in her coat pocket every mile she had walked since. She went into the house and brought it out and put it in Josiah's hand. He read it. It was written in a schooled hand, but the words shook. "All right," Josiah said again, and this time there was something in his voice that had not been there before, a low, banked heat that Prudence heard and understood without needing it explained. Now let me stop the story here one moment, because this is the beat where I know some of you listening are already thinking about someone in your own life who was underestimated, who was written off, who walked up somebody's road with nothing but their nerve. And I want you to hold that person in mind through the rest of what happens here, because Prudence Halloran was not the first girl to stand at a gate like that, and she will not be the last. If you know that story, from your own family or your own town, tell me down in the comments where you're listening from. I like knowing who's on the porch with me tonight. Josiah rode into Adderley the next morning at first light. He did not go to the sheriff. He went to a man named Alonzo Brecker, who kept a law practice above the general store and had drawn up the papers 7 years earlier when Josiah had buried his wife and settled his affairs. Alonzo Brecker was 71 years old, gout-ridden, sharp as a fresh-honed axe, and he had never, in 50 years of practice, lost a case involving a child. Josiah laid the letter on Brecker's desk. He laid Prudence's father's letter beside it. He said, "The girl is 19. In this state, that makes her of age. She can petition for guardianship of her brothers in her own right. I'll stand as her surety. I'll deed a share of my land into a trust for those boys if it comes to that. Whatever you need to make it hold, you tell me, and it's done before he gets off the train." Alonzo Brecker read both letters. He read them slowly. He looked at Josiah over the tops of his spectacles for a long moment, and then he permitted himself the smallest and driest of smiles. "Josiah," he said, "I have been waiting 7 years for you to bring me an interesting problem. Sit down." They filed the petition that afternoon. They filed it before the county judge, an old friend of Brecker's named Holloway who had known Josiah since before Ellen, and who read the father's letter with a face that grew, degree by degree, harder and quieter as he went. Judge Holloway granted a temporary emergency order of guardianship to Prudence Halloran that same afternoon, pending a full hearing, and he did so on the record, in open court, with 3 witnesses present, and he asked Brecker to see to it personally that a copy was in the hands of the Lincoln lawyer by the following Monday. Corbin Halloran arrived in Adderley on the 1st of June, as promised. He came off the noon train with a leather case and a starched collar and a small, pinched, expensive-looking man beside him who turned out to be his own attorney. He had wired ahead to the sheriff, and the sheriff, a decent man named Bill Truax, met them at the platform with his hat in his hand and a folded piece of paper he had been asked to deliver. Truax gave Corbin Halloran the copy of the emergency order. He watched Corbin Halloran read it. He watched the color leave the man's face and then come back in a mottled, ugly way, and he watched the expensive-looking lawyer beside him lean in and murmur something. And he watched Corbin Halloran round on his own attorney in the middle of the platform and say something that made two women waiting for the mail take a step back. "There'll be a hearing Thursday, Mr. Halloran," Sheriff Truax said, mild as milk. "You're welcome to attend. Meantime, I'd ask you to keep clear of the Merrick place." Judge Holloway was specific. Corbin Halloran attended the hearing. He sat in the front row in his starched collar, and he watched his own lawyer make a case that Prudence Halloran was too young, too poor, and too unsettled to raise 3 boys. He watched Alonzo Brecker rise, in his gouty, unhurried way, and enter into evidence the letter from a dead man written 11 years before. He watched Brecker call Josiah Merrick to the stand, and he watched Josiah, plain as prairie, testify that Prudence had run his household for 6 weeks, that she rose before the light and worked until after dark, that her brothers were fed and washed and taught their letters at his kitchen table each night, and that he had, of his own free will and sound mind, deeded 20 acres of Merrick land into a permanent trust for the 3 Halloran boys to be theirs at their majority, regardless of what the court decided that day. The room went very quiet at that. Prudence, sitting behind Brecker, turned her head toward Josiah, and he did not look at her, because if he had looked at her right, then he would not have been able to keep his composure for the rest of the proceeding, and he needed his composure for what came next. Judge Holloway asked Corbin Halloran to stand. He asked him 3 questions. He asked him whether he had ever sent word or money to his brother's family in the 11 years of their absence. He asked him how he had come to know of his nieces and nephews' whereabouts in Adderley. He asked him whether he had ever, in his life, met the 3 boys whose custody he was that day seeking. Corbin Halloran answered no, no, and no. Judge Holloway did not raise his voice. He rarely did. He said, "Petition denied. Guardianship granted permanent to Miss Prudence Halloran, with Mr. Josiah Merrick as bonded surety. Mr. Halloran, you'll pay court costs, and you'll be on the afternoon train." Corbin Halloran opened his mouth. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. Corbin Halloran shut his mouth. He was on the afternoon train. They drove home from Adderley in the wagon in the long light of a June evening. The boys were in the back, half asleep from the long day and the strangeness of the courtroom, and Prudence sat on the bench beside Josiah with her hands folded very still in her lap, and for the first mile she did not speak. Then she said, without looking at him, 20 acres. "Was going to fallow that quarter anyway," Josiah said. "That's not why you did it." "No," he said. "It wasn't." She was quiet another mile. The mules' hooves made their soft, steady sound in the dust, and a killdeer ran along the ditch beside them, and somewhere out past the cottonwoods a bobwhite was calling. "Mr. Joe," said the little one from the back of the wagon, sleepy, sudden. "Are we going home?" Josiah did not answer at once. He kept his eyes on the road, on the mules' rumps, on the far line of his own fence rising up in the last of the light. Beside him, Prudence made a small sound he did not turn to look at, out of respect. "Yes, son," he said. "We're going home." They were married the following spring, in the Methodist church in Adderley, and the widow Ashcroft brought a cake, and Hetty Barnes cried into her handkerchief and pretended she had something in her eye. Micah stood up beside Josiah in a suit that had been hastily cut down from one of Josiah's own, and Ansel held the ring, and little Wyatt fell asleep in the front pew halfway through and had to be carried out by his sister after the vows. The 4 plates on the Merrick kitchen table became 5, and then, in time, 6, when a daughter was born the following winter and named Ellen, at Prudence's insistence, over Josiah's quiet, grateful protest. The 20 acres in trust became a working piece of ground that the 3 Halloran boys farmed together as men, and none of them, in their long lives afterward, ever called Josiah anything but father, though he had not asked them to and would not have. A door does not need to be knocked on to be answered. That was the thing Josiah Merrick came to understand in the 7 years after he set that 4th plate. that some of the most important thresholds in a life are the ones a person doesn't know they've been standing at until somebody walks up the lane at dusk and asks a question so small and so enormous that a man has to decide, in the space of a breath, what kind of man he is going to be for the rest of his days. He set 4 plates. That was all he did, and it turned out to be everything. Thank you for sitting with this one tonight. If it warmed a corner of your evening, or reminded you of somebody in your own family who opened a door when they didn't have to, I'd be glad to hear about it in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from and who you're thinking of. There are more stories like this one coming, and I'll see you at the next fire.